Today we are talking about approaching sponsors and sort of how to negotiate contracts a bit. Yeah, there's a few different elements to the whole piece. I mean, obviously as a pro triathlete, trying to get sponsorships is a massive part of how you can make some money. For me, it's certainly the way that I've survived the last couple of years because I've not really made any prize money. So obviously there's like the financial piece, there's the kit piece, because I think actually it's relatively easy to get kind of free or discounted kit off people, not that easy to get cash. But they're the two main elements you get from sponsors. And then I guess the other piece is also like podium bonuses and performance related bonuses. So yeah, a few different elements to it. And I thought it would be quite interesting to sort of talk through some of the kind of mechanisms, I guess, of how you approach people, how you can try and negotiate some contracts as someone who doesn't have an agent, mainly because I'm not at a point yet of having big enough contracts where I thought it was worth it. So there's been points where I've considered working with an agent to, I guess, try and find some different contacts, get some new sponsors, but actually I've not had any approaches yet from anyone who's come with any offers of people that I'm not already in contact with or anyone that different. So for the moment, it's just me, which at times is great and at times is very stressful. But actually, I also quite like having that relationship myself with a lot of the sponsors. I think it definitely adds something, from my perspective at least, a bit different of like, I feel like I can get to know their brands a bit better. That kind of interaction makes it a bit more personal. I feel that connection with, like for them, with my story, because it's coming directly from me, is actually quite good. So most of the time I actually really enjoy that direct contact. Where it's not quite as enjoyable is when it then comes to the negotiation and trying to sort of work out, how do you pitch yourself? What are you asking for? What are you offering back? Yeah, then it gets a bit more stressful. And I guess from an individual point of view, not knowing, like not having that agent's view, I guess, of what everyone else is on. So also not knowing how to compare yourself of like the level is a bit tough sometimes. But yeah, I'll try and talk through a bit of kind of how I've approached it. Hopefully that's helpful to some people as we kind of look forward towards next year, or just interesting for people maybe. And if it's not, sorry, you can turn off. So I think from how I've tried to approach sponsorship, the key thing for me has always been I want to work with brands that I actually like and believe in. One of the main reasons I kept working part-time initially as a pro was so that I was never kind of financially dependent on trying to get sponsors and having to kind of chase the money as such. So I wanted to be able to kind of almost pick and choose who I worked with, to be able to pick the brands I liked, worked with people kind of regardless of the money, because it was kit I believed in or brands that I liked what they were doing. And that has been the case, which has been really nice. So I think that is quite, like for me, and I think for a lot of brands, it's really important, I think, that you actually genuinely like the brand. So you have that, I guess, I was going to say genuine again, but there's a different word for it, but I've forgotten it. I think you want it to be real. You don't want to be that person that, yeah, authentic, that's a good word. Yeah, you want that authenticity, basically, of when you're talking about a product or showing that you're using it, you can see that you do actually use it, as opposed to, oh, here's this thing that I've put on for this Instagram post that I'd never actually trained with. So for me, I think that authenticity of brands you actually like. It's also much more compelling for a brand if you approach them of, I've been using your stuff for X number of years, I really like it. Is there a way that we can work together? As opposed to, I think you might have some cash, will you sponsor me? Secondly, I think you need to be quite clear on what you're looking for from them. So I think like the ask needs to be really clear of, and like prioritizing the ask as well. So I think almost saying number one priority is cash or kit, number two priority is that you help support me in a slightly different way. I guess for me the example of that is with Classified, for example. One of the key things they've done to support me this year is sending a guy, Yannick, to come and do some of my mechanics and set up the bike properly in a couple of races, which, yeah, for like that is not like cash that they're offering me or kit they're offering me, but that is kind of vital to setting up the bike properly and helping me be successful. So I think there's other things like that you can work into your asks that can add loads of value but don't necessarily cost the company money. Because I don't have a mechanic boyfriend. Yeah, well, sometimes he pretends, but yeah, so the clear ask and being realistic. And I think for me that's somewhere where I've not always known what to go in with the pitch in terms of cash. So actually often I've had to kind of wait to see what is the company going to offer and then try and make that decision of, do I think they're lowballing me? Can I negotiate that a bit? But I do think a lot of pros, actually, if you ask them one-on-one, are probably happy to share some like rough details on the rough value of some of the, say, cash sponsorships or what they're getting, because yeah, I think it's important to know that you're not being treated differently to people on your kind of level. It's also then being really clear on kind of what are they going to get from sponsoring you. I think like results is one piece of it, but actually in these days I don't think the results are necessarily that important, or it can't be the only important thing anyway. And then I also think you don't want that to be the only thing, because when you then get injured like I've been, you've not got any results. So I think if you try and base everything on results, you're almost setting yourself up to fail a little bit. So then it's looking at what else can you offer them? Like, is it your social media following? Is it your kind of local community engagement? Is it other stuff that you're looking to do that's helpful to them? Obviously, for most brands, they're looking for people to help them sell their product or kind of spread the awareness of that product. So it's looking at, if social media is not really your thing, how else are you doing that? And obviously for some people, doing that through their results is how they're doing it. But if you're not sure you want to rely on results and you're not that big on social media, it's thinking about what else can I offer? So yeah, so being clear on where you're adding value and what you're offering. I think the other thing to consider is how long a partnership you're signing up for. Again, for me, I'm trying quite hard to sort of build those longer relationships and have brands that are kind of, because they're the brands that I like and want to use anyway, that are then with me for a longer period of time. You also want to be conscious of not signing contracts for too long, or at least giving yourself like wiggle space in them of how to renegotiate. So for example, like if you, like say I was signing a new contract now, I obviously don't have any good results from the last like few years, so I wouldn't be in a great position to kind of negotiate for like a great contract. But what I could do is put some kind of clause in there of, at the end of this year, based on results, there's scope to negotiate some of the terms. Because yeah, I think sometimes you want the security of a slightly longer contract, but you don't necessarily want to be tied into not as good a terms. So that's another thing to sort of take into consideration. From a like prize money perspective, not prize money, from a podium bonus perspective, it's like potentially harder now to get brands to give podium bonuses for as many races. So say like 5 years ago, I probably had written into most of my contracts, well, maybe not 5, I don't think I had that many contracts. 4 years ago, I think most of them I would have had a podium bonus for like any Ironman race, any challenge race. Whereas now I think there's so many races and there's obviously such a broad scope in the depth of those races that actually most of my contracts, I've only got podium bonuses for a certain level of race. So whether that's like a pro series race or like a championship race. But again, it's worth, depending on what races you're targeting. So if you wanted to maybe go and target all the challenge races and chase the challenge bonus that they give, you could try and negotiate that with your sponsors to kind of say, this is the races that I'm doing, so can we have some kind of bonus for that? So I think that's the kind of key things. The main thing to also think about is sort of knowing what your value is. So I also think it's quite easy sometimes to sort of be like, oh, something's better than nothing. But I think you have to be quite careful around not falling into the trap of underselling yourself and then kind of setting yourself up that you've sort of positioned yourself. I don't know, say you sign with someone to just get a bit of free kit because you're like, actually, I quite like using that and I really just want it for free rather than paying for it. You're potentially then not in a great position to ever be at a point where you're actually getting any cash from them or anything more. So it's also trying to think about some of those things. But yeah, obviously, if there's anything... How am I approaching brands? Yeah, so trying to approach brands... A lot of the time you need that in, so you need to try and find a contact, usually like their head of marketing, or some of them will have like a head of athletes, or if you can just find like a direct line into like the CEO, that's quite effective. Yeah, so I guess that's probably one of the other challenges if you are trying to find people yourself, of knowing who that right person is. But yeah, I think usually actually around races is quite a good time of finding people and finding some of the right contacts. And I think a lot of brands are quite open, like if you approach them at, say, an expo stand, to kind of say who's the right person to talk to point you in the right direction. I also think don't be afraid to try and like use your network of people. Like if you know someone who's sponsored by a brand you like, reach out and be like, can you put me in touch with the right contact? Because the worst that's going to happen is they're going to turn around and say no. Oh yeah, final thing I think is timing as well. Like obviously most brands are running on an annual basis in terms of like their budgeting and when they decide what they're spending and how they're spending it. And now is kind of the time that you sort of need to get in with people before they've spent all of their budget for next year. I think if you start trying to talk to people in like January, February, then all their budget will be allocated and it'll be very hard to get much other than just maybe some free kit.